Good evening, I'm Tilang Chindoji and you're watching In Focus. The guest tonight is Ms. Nicole Plus. Welcome to In Focus.
Thank you very much.
How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Yes.
And I believe you are a children's book writer?
That's right. I'm Australian and I write books for children, and I've been writing for around 20 years, and I have 4 books published in Australia, and they're also published in certain places around the world as well. Yes.
And in college you did law, right?
I did. When I finished school, I did arts law at Sydney Uni, and I worked as a lawyer for around 7 years. But I knew that I had always wanted to be a writer, but it's quite a difficult thing just to start off and do. So I wanted to study. I knew I wanted to go to university, and I do believe in higher education. So I did that, and I think I just came to a point when I realised that what I really wanted to do with my life was be a writer. That had always been my dream, and so I just got to the stage. I thought, well, I'm going to pursue it. And funnily enough, as soon as I decided that, I finished my first book, and it was accepted for publication not long after that. So it all worked out.
So your book published by which?
My last 2 books have been published by Penguin Books, which is, it's in Australia but around the world as well. And my first 2 books were published by HarperCollins.
Yes. And they're called Black Belt?
Yes.
What is that book about?
Black Belt is a book for children around the age 10 to 14, and it's a journal of a boy who studies karate. So that was the first book I wrote, and the idea there is comparing mental and physical strength, because the boy is physically strong, but his sister is disabled and she's actually mentally strong. My second book is for about the same age group, and that's called Kindred, and that's a collection of short stories for children. Then I published a book for young adults called Beach Baby, and my last book, which just came out this year in March, is called Hope Bay, and that again is for teenagers, and it's been really well received in Australia, so I'm really pleased.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes. I hope some of our children will also look at those books.
Oh, good.
Read
yes.
Those books. And you're actually conducting a workshop for reading and writing?
I am.
Children's book.
I am.
Can you tell us about that?
Happily, yes. I've been here all of September, and I'm here for the rest of October, and I'm on an AsiaLink residency, which is a scheme run through Australia, and they're keen for Australian writers to come to countries in Asia so that we can gain a good appreciation of your culture and hopefully write a book which would help Australian children understand Asian culture in more depth. So that's part of the reason why I'm here. And the other part is that I've been working with the Education Department, specifically with CAPS, the Curriculum and Professional Support Division, and they've put together a great initiative, which I was more than happy to be a part of. And they decided to run a 2-day workshop for various schools throughout the country. So the first day of the workshop was reading, and the second day schools represented were, I think even Gellipu was represented at Trongsa. So teachers came from all around to be part of the workshop so that they could then go back to their school and talk about what we'd all learnt together.
Mm-hmm. Have you visited some of our bookshops as well?
A few, yes, but to tell you the truth, I've just arrived in Thimphu today, and I'm hoping to explore a bit more. So I haven't actually had a good look in any bookshops yet.
And I was wondering, children in Bhutan, we're traditionally an oral society.
Yes.
And, reading is still quite an effort.
Yes.
So how would you inculcate the habit of reading in children? As a children's writer, what do you think is the essential ingredients for that?
Well, I tend to think myself good reading material is probably the key, and I always think how successful Harry Potter was. It just suddenly, all these millions of children around the world were keen readers because there was a book there that they really loved. So I think having good reading material is probably one of the most important things. And also having reading material so that children can identify the right books for them to read. So, for example, if you're a 6-year-old, you know whereabouts in the school library to find books that are just right for you, because I think it's important to match the book with the child's reading ability. If the book's too easy, they're not going to be interested. If the book's too hard, they're going to lose heart because they feel, I can't read this. So I think that's an important thing, and in doing that, teachers and librarians can help children as much as they can to identify the right books. So that's an important thing, yes.
Yes. And also children, these days they watch a lot of animations.
Yes.
Like Pokemon, Digimon, so
Yes,
on.
yes.
And these are visually appealing.
Yes.
So would you say that books which have visual appeal in them would be popular with the kids?
I think so, and I personally love picture books. I think with older children they often won't. They often are not interested in picture books because they think they're for the younger kids. But I think picture books are fantastic. And one of the focuses of the reading and writing workshop has been picture books because for me, a good picture book is the best sort of literature that you can give to children. So I think society around the world is becoming more visual. We have a lot more screens to look at. We have television screens and computer screens.
Right.
And the way I look at it, it's all a mix. It's a balance. And I think that if good programs on television are great. Good reading material is great as well. So I know some people are very anti-television, but I think in moderation it's okay. But at the same time, I think reading is the key to ongoing learning throughout life. Yeah, it's one of the things that I've been talking specifically about in the writing workshops. That to be a literate person, there are several key things involved, and speaking and listening are parts just as much as reading and writing. So we have been focusing on those four key areas as we've been discussing things in the group. So,
and how was your feedback from the workshop you've done with all these teachers from even remote schools?
Yes. Well, the feedback has all been positive, and I think part of the benefit of the workshop was that I was there and I could share some of the reading practices in Australia. But I think a large part of the benefit was that all the teachers who are passionate about reading and writing were able to meet and talk about the practices that they have in their schools and how they see the way forward. So I think that they've been very worthwhile and really well received. And I still am hearing things back even now saying, that it's going well and that some of the schools have been trying to implement some of the things we discussed.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you made the career switch from being a lawyer to a writer, specializing in children's book.
Yeah.
How was the transition? I mean, was it, since you are from Australia,
yes.
where, the children read books, the parents encourage that.
Yes.
But being a writer, what does it take to be a writer?
I think I knew in my heart it was what I always wanted to do, even when I was very young. And I think that there are some people that they just need to tell stories. I think up stories all the time. I have more ideas than I'll ever be able to write in my lifetime. And to me, that's normal. But one of the questions that I'm asked more than any other as a writer is, where do you get your ideas from?
Yes, where do you?
Yes, that's right. And for me, it's just natural. It's just who I am, really. So for me, it wasn't a huge decision. I knew that it was what I wanted to do, and I wasn't young when I decided, well, this is it. I'm going to pursue writing. And at that stage, I was so certain that it was what I wanted to do that I was just going to persist until I was successful. So I think that I was very lucky that I always knew what I wanted to do. But I often say to children, if there is something you want to do and you feel that you can do it, pursue it, and you'll probably be successful.
So it's something like follow your dreams?
Yes. That's
Does
right.
being a mother help, of 2 daughters?
It does, yes. It does very much.
Those ideas?
Yeah, it's interesting. My daughters didn't read my books for quite a while, but they do read them now, and they give me comments where they think I could, maybe improve them or make them more interesting for kids their age. So.
And are there books on Bhutan in Australia that children or the adults read?
Not enough. I think we need not enough. I think the world needs more books about Bhutan, and I think the world needs more books written by Bhutanese for both for Bhutan and for the rest of the world. And that was one of the things that was identified in the workshops as which would be a really good outcome, in that. In Australia, for example, there's been a real take-off in children's literature just in the last 20 years, which isn't very long. It's just about from when I started writing that a lot of books by Australian authors written for Australian children came out. And I think it's very important that the children of a culture read the stories of that culture. And interestingly enough, a lot of the writers of books for children were school teachers. So it was really interesting for me to be meeting with so many school teachers and saying that. And it was interesting because on the first day of the workshop, I might ask, is there anyone in the room who's thought about writing books for children? And everyone was going, oh, no. By the end, by the second day, in a group of 20, there would be 4 or 5 who would confess that, yes, they would like to write a book, particularly for children, and they felt that, they might actually, start or continue with what they'd already begun. So
it's never too late to start writing.
No. And it's never too late to start reading either. Yes. And
so how early do kids read in Australia?
Well, in Australia, in Canada, in America and in the UK, there's a real push at the moment to give babies books because it's recognised now that the earliest a child can have a book in their hands, the better, because they learn so much just by using the book. They learn the way the pages turn. They learn the way that you read from left to right, and with the child having a book, they can actually model the behaviour of their parents. So if they may see their parents reading a newspaper or a book, then they have the same thing in their form to use. So that basically is now recognised as a start. It's not too young to give a baby a book. And when my children were born, they had lots of books in their cot, and they were just picture books, but they would play with them pretty much like toys, so that they became familiar with books, and they felt comfortable around books. So it wasn't something that was introduced once the children reached school. And then from there, the other emphasis is to read to children. And read to children. Some people say 3 times a day, which I think is probably hard to do. But if you can read to children once a day, read to your children once a day, or if the older siblings can read to their younger siblings once a day, that's great. And it doesn't have to be for long. It can just be for 5 minutes, and that will build up, and then children will become comfortable with books. And it's not only recognising the written words on the page, but it's also hearing the language, because as I was saying earlier, listening and speaking is all part of literacy. So it all builds up together, so that hopefully by the time children reach school, it's all very familiar, and it's not this strange world. Children feel reasonably competent, from day one.
So you've been in Bhutan for some time now.
Yes.
Would you say there are a lot of resources there we can draw from, and ideas that we can get to write the books for children? Do you think?
I think Bhutan has a very strong a wealth of stories, and in the workshops, I was just amazed. And the great pleasure for me in the workshop, the first pleasure was to be in a room with people who care about books and reading as much as I do. And I think when you're in kindred company, So I was immediately comfortable. And after a day, I feel that we were all very relaxed and happy, and we were all on the same path. So it was very pleasurable from that point of view. And then the other thing that I found really interesting is that we would be doing writing workshops, and the stories that the teachers were sharing, which were oral stories, were fantastic. And I would say more than once, that story is enough for a picture book. It's great. It's got everything you need, because we went through all the elements of story writing, so that and these were all familiar in any case, but it was workshop, we're exploring ideas. So we would go through all the elements, and then we would discuss the oral tales that are all very well known in Bhutan,
yes.
And then we would discuss how well they could be adapted to written form. So I think that I personally feel that all the ingredients are in place, and I have seen some picture books and text, fiction books that have been written and produced by CAPS. So I feel that everything's in place. And with the right steps, I think good reading materials in the schools, good libraries, so people can actually access good reading material. and I think a reading culture is something that
Yes.
is here, and it will
is.
just grow.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
So,
There are plenty of books in the market.
yes.
Which books, the children's books, do you recommend and that you actually buy for your daughters?
I like Roald Dahl, so we have a lot of Roald Dahl books at home. I also like a lot of the contemporary Australian authors. I think are great. So they'd be authors like Mem Fox with picture books, and Paul Jennings, who writes fantastic short stories. Maurice Gleitzman is also very popular. Gillian Rubinstein is a great writer. Often I think if you were looking at purchasing books, say for a library or a school, a good way to approach it is to look at the publishers' catalogues, because they make it so easy for you now, because they specify books according to ages, so that that's a good key for you. Yes.
The different age groups.
Yes, I think, as I was saying before, it's important to have a range of books for lots of different readers, and the publishers categorise their books according to age and reading ability, so that makes it easy.
Do you see another phenomenon like Harry Potter coming out? The genre such
I
as
couldn't
that.
comment, but I think that there's always something new and fantastic that no one expects. That is just around the corner.
Maybe from Bhutan.
Maybe. Yeah, well, why not? Yes.
And are you going to take back something from Bhutan, like for you to?
Yes. Look,
work on?
already I've learnt so much, and I've been so inspired that I'm sure that something will come from my time here. I don't know what yet, and I don't know what form, but I am thinking in terms of readers about 8 to 10, and beyond that I don't know. But being in Bhutan has had a big effect on me. It's an exceptional country. It's physically very beautiful, and I think your culture is so rich and has so much history that it's hard not to be affected. Yes.
And during your travels, have you met any children that?
Well, I have visited during the workshops. I've asked if I could go and visit in the classrooms. So I've met many very beautiful children, and I'll always ask in the classroom, what would your children like to do when you grow up? And I've had lots of pilots, doctors, nurses and teachers. That every school there's been those 4 in particular. And it wasn't until a school in Paro just last week I met a boy called Sonam Tandon, who wants to be a writer. And I shook his hand and I said, I'd like to have my photo taken with you, because you're the first child I've met who said he'd like to be a writer. Yes. And his teacher would like to write for children. So I thought that was interesting, that she had probably encouraged him to think along those lines.
Yes. So, on average, how do you think the Bhutanese children react to, like written words and books?
Exactly the same as Australian children. I brought some of my favourite picture books, and I would read them, and they loved the stories, and they appreciated them in exactly the same way as Australian children would. So that's one of the things that I believe, that so many stories we have as people are common, and because we're all human. So, and that was another thing which came out in the workshops, that quite often the stories that people were sharing were exactly the stories that I might share in Australia. So I think there's a common thread of stories that we all know and appreciate and want to hear, just because we're all human. But then there's also the cultural stories that are really important. And as I was saying before, I think it's important that children of a culture read the stories of that culture.
So, like you were saying, in 20 years' time, Australia made an effort to build reading.
That's right. Well, we had Australia does have to have strategies in place to encourage children to read.
Right.
I think it's something that worldwide is something that educationists focus on. How you encourage and improve reading, because it's the basis of virtually everything you do in life, because it's the basis of everything in the curriculum, and it's the basis of communication. So that's something I always stress whenever I visit a school. I try and explain to the children that if they can learn the tools of reading, everything they do for the rest of their schooling will be easier, because they need to interpret language and they need to be able to express themselves in order to get what they want. So it's so important. So.
So you look so content being a writer.
Oh.
Do you ever think you'll go back to your law practice?
Never.
Never?
Never. No, I'll happily write until the day I die. And sometimes I worry because I think I've got, like at the moment, I've got 4 books in my head and I've started 3 of them. And I also will add another book somewhere in the mix about Bhutan, and I don't necessarily write them in the order that they're in my head. Suddenly, if one becomes more interesting, well, that will come to the front of the queue. So my worry is that I won't write everything I want to write. So I think I'm really lucky. I've always had a strong affinity with children. My natural career would be to be a teacher, and I think that even though I did law, becoming a children's writer, I came back to what really suits me. So I think I'm really lucky. I think that the books that children read are the most important books that there can be, and I think that children deserve the best. So they need the best ideas, and they need the ideas expressed in the best way possible. And that's something too that we would talk about in the workshops, because the children's books that I brought with me, and the picture books in particular, the ideas in those books were really very complicated and very complex. But one of the things I believe is that children have the same concerns as adults do, but at their own level, and so that stories are a way for us to understand ourselves and understand the world we live in, and that's why books are so important. So I think it's the children deserve the best, and children deserve the best books to read. So you need to find those books, and this is something that is said so often in Australia now, that there are so many fantastic books for children that children shouldn't have to read things that don't interest them, because there are great books out there. And whenever I visit a school, I always say to the children, and I know that they listen to me, because I'll see, in particular the boys, I'll see them perk up and think, well, what Nicole's saying is quite true. I'll say to them, there's so many books available. Perhaps fiction isn't the book for you. Perhaps it's going to be autobiography, or perhaps it's going to be an adventure book, or it might even be an instruction type book, for example, a recipe book, or a book about cars, or how to, do-it-yourself type books. And I encourage children to keep looking for a book that is really the book for them, because if you can just get that key, then suddenly you've created a reader, because they realise how much information is available in a book. So I think that's something that children do need to hear, to explore and find the right book for them. But of course, the right book for them has to be available. So children need a range of books, lots of different genres. They need fiction, they need non-fiction, they need, as you were saying earlier, books that are primarily visual, so that children who are visual people, visual thinkers, they can find a book that really communicates to them.
For the little children.
For the little children, but also for older children. Also, there are really fantastic books. So I try, because I have 2 school-age children. Both my daughters are at school by 9 o'clock. So generally, during the school term, I can write from 9 till 3, and I'm pretty dedicated in writing those hours. And then from 3 for the rest of the day until 9 at night or whatever, I'll be doing the housework type, and whatever else I need to do. So for me, it's a great life, and I love to write. So I'm always very keen to get to my desk and to move on with the story.
And work
yes.
on your computer? Do you
have
that old typewriter?
I only write on a computer, and I can't write longhand, so that's okay. Some people can only write longhand, and some people are very fussy. They write with pencil on paper, or pen or whatever. But I can only write on computer, and I rewrite a lot.
And on that note, Nicole, thank you very much for talking to us on In Focus.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. And that was our children's book author, Nicole Plus, who talked to us on In Focus tonight. And I would like to thank all our viewers for watching us, and we'll be back next time. Okay, I think then it's Daichi.
I heard something like this. Purposely, Prabhupada meeting, but the original cancer told I've chosen two names actually. Daichi and Rice Bowl.
Rice bowl is good. Okay, no? But it's
Oh my god.
Hassan, once when we went, we hardly ordered much.
1,200.
Yeah, only actually tom yum soup. They're serving
There's an international size everywhere you go, you get the normal size. After the fifth, then you feel like giving up.
I don't know how many grams and how
If you're a he has to do
any job is just old in other way.
Oh.
We're so used to do this. 그거 BBS 왜 무슨 주행이 있었던 거지.